Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The morning started like any other, but I sensed something different in Lisa. She seemed tense, like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but holding back. We were gearing up for a weekend getaway in the mountains, something we'd planned for weeks. I wanted it to be an escape for both of us, a chance to recharge, leave the world behind, and reconnect. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this trip meant something entirely different for her. As we loaded the car, I tried to push away the creeping doubts. I told myself I was just overthinking, that marriage was hard work, and maybe Lisa was just as stressed as I was. But when she left her phone on the passenger seat and ran inside a gas station halfway to the cabin, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Her phone lit up, buzzing silently with a message from someone named Alex. The screen showed just a preview, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. Can't wait for you to come back. Miss you already. I stared at it, frozen, the world around me fading to a dull hum. In a second, everything I had been ignoring clicked into place. The late nights, the work events, the sudden need for space and time away from home. Lisa's bright and familiar laugh now felt like a stranger's laugh. Before I could process any more, she came out, wiping her hands on her jeans. Seeing me holding her phone, her eyes widened, and a strange look passed across her face, an odd mix of guilt and defiance. She didn't even try to grab it back, she just slipped it out of my hand, set it in her lap, and settled into her seat without a word. The rest of the drive passed in silence. She pretended everything was normal, but I couldn't focus. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying the past few months in my mind, searching for clues I had missed, for moments I'd brushed off as paranoia. The weight of it all settled heavily on my chest, and I struggled to breathe under the suffocating realization that the life I'd known was likely a lie. When we arrived at the cabin, Lisa was distant, claiming she had a headache and needed to rest. I let her go, watching her disappear into the bedroom while I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. Everything felt surreal. I knew I had to confront her, but I didn't want to rush in without being sure of what I was dealing with. I pulled out my phone and searched through our service provider's account, piecing together a record of her calls and texts over the past few months. The patterns were clear: long conversations, late at night, during work events, and girls' nights. I'd always been trusting. I wanted to be the kind of husband who respected his wife's space, who didn't hover or question every move. But now, that trust felt like a weakness. It was almost laughable, thinking about all the times I'd told friends how strong our relationship was, how proud I was of the trust between us. And here I was, uncovering her lies one message at a time. That evening, as we sat in silence, eating a dinner that I'd prepared, I decided I'd let her continue her charade a bit longer. I was still piecing together the evidence, still working through the shock. I told myself I needed more proof, more details before I took any steps. She glanced up at me occasionally, perhaps sensing the growing distance, but said nothing. Her silence was almost worse than any confession she could have made. Back in the city, the next week passed in a blur. I acted as if nothing had changed, but each moment with her felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I barely slept, lying awake beside her, staring at the ceiling as my mind raced with images of her with someone else. I started coming home later than usual, burying myself in work to avoid the inevitable confrontation. She didn't seem to notice or care, too absorbed in her own life to sense the wall building between us. But beneath the calm exterior, I was strategizing. I knew I couldn't just confront her and hope for an honest answer. If she had been lying to my face this long, I couldn't trust her to come clean now. I needed a plan, something airtight, a way to ensure she couldn't turn the tables or twist my words. I spent every free moment gathering what I needed: messages, financial records, even screenshots of her phone log. It was a bitter irony, using the same skills I applied to my work to dissect my own marriage. Finally, I was ready. One evening, after she'd left for another one of her networking events, I contacted a lawyer. It was one of the hardest calls I'd ever made, but in the end, I knew it was necessary. I laid everything out, explaining the situation in a detached, almost clinical way. My lawyer was efficient, assuring me that with the evidence I had, we'd be able to build a strong case. It was strange, almost surreal, discussing my marriage in such cold terms, reducing it to assets, timelines, and legal jargon. But that detachment was the only thing keeping me from breaking down. When she came home that night, I watched her closely, noting every movement, every glance she cast my way. I wondered if she could see the change in me, the calm resolve that had replaced the desperation I'd felt just days before. Part of me wanted her to notice, to sense the storm that was coming. But she moved through the house like she always did, oblivious, wrapped up in her own world. The next day, I went through the house, gathering anything that might matter in the divorce proceedings. Bank statements, property documents, any evidence of shared assets. With each piece of paper, each contract, I felt a small part of my old self fade away. The man who had trusted her implicitly, who had believed in loyalty and partnership, was disappearing, replaced by someone colder, harder, someone who could look at the woman he loved and see only betrayal. Finally, the last piece fell into place. I had everything I needed, every document and message lined up, each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I knew it was only a matter of time before I confronted her, and I was ready. No more doubts, no more second-guessing. It was time to take back control of my life. It was Friday night when Lisa came home unusually late. I sat in the darkened living room, watching the faint headlights cast shadows across the walls as her car pulled into the driveway. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I wanted her to see me this way, waiting, silent, in the dim, heavy stillness of our house. She opened the door quietly, likely hoping not to disturb me. But when she stepped into the hall, her gaze met mine, and she stopped dead in her tracks. "Oh," she stammered, adjusting her purse strap nervously. "You're still up?" I didn't answer, just watched her with a steady gaze, studying her every move. Her clothes were slightly rumpled, her makeup smudged. The faintest hint of cologne, someone else's, lingered in the air. My stomach twisted, but I held my expression in check, suppressing the wave of anger that threatened to break through my calm facade. "Long night?" I asked evenly, though the words came out sharper than I intended. "Yeah," she replied, brushing her hair back and avoiding my gaze. "Networking dinner ran late. I tried to text you, but my phone died." She held up her phone as if to prove her story, the screen black. It was almost laughable, her excuse so flimsy I could have torn it apart right then. But I didn't. Instead, I gave a slight nod, acting as if her explanation was enough, knowing that confronting her now would only lead to a pointless argument, a chance for her to deny everything. No, I would wait. Let her think I'd bought her story. "All right," I said, rising from the couch. "I'll see you in the morning." Without another word, I brushed past her, heading to bed. Behind me, I could sense her relief, hear the soft exhale as she assumed the storm had passed. But it hadn't. If anything, it was only just beginning. Over the weekend, Lisa was unusually attentive, as if sensing something amiss and trying to smooth over any doubts. She made my favorite breakfast Saturday morning, brought up memories of our early days together, and even suggested a movie night, a rarity in recent years. I went along with it, playing the part of the unsuspecting husband, all the while feeling like a stranger in my own home. Her attempts to act normal, to mask her betrayal with affection, only fueled the fire building inside me. By Sunday evening, I knew I couldn't keep up the charade much longer. The documents were ready, the plan set. I had spent the weekend in my office, double-checking every piece of evidence I'd gathered. My lawyer had sent over the finalized papers, detailing the division of assets and grounds for divorce. It was all there, neatly organized and ready for the moment I decided to bring it all crashing down. As I sat at my desk that night, staring at the pile of papers in front of me. A strange calm washed over me. I realized that I felt no sadness, no regret, only a hollow acceptance that this was the end. The life we'd built, the years we'd spent together, all felt like faded memories now, overshadowed by the betrayal that had poisoned everything. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we'd exchanged, the promises we had made. It seemed almost absurd now, the idea that we had ever believed in something so fragile, so easily broken. When I went to bed that night, I knew what had to be done. Tomorrow, I would confront her, lay everything out, and watch her world crumble. And part of me was looking forward to it, to seeing the look on her face when she realized the depth of her mistake. Monday morning arrived, bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to hit. Lisa was getting ready for work, oblivious as ever, humming softly as she brushed her hair. I watched her from the doorway, studying her every move, wondering if she had any inkling of what was coming. But she seemed relaxed, even cheerful, as if last night's deception had never happened. "Do you have a minute?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She turned, surprised to see me standing there. "Of course," she replied, setting down her hairbrush. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and then held up the thick envelope containing the divorce papers. Her smile faltered, confusion clouding her eyes as she stared at it. "What's that?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "It's the end, Lisa," I said quietly. "The end of whatever this has become." For a moment, she just stared at me, her mind struggling to process what was happening. And then, as realization dawned, her face drained of color. You can't be serious," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I'm serious," I replied, feeling the anger I'd kept buried rise to the surface. "I've been serious since the moment I found out about Alex. Since I saw that message and realized that you've been lying to me, sneaking around like a coward instead of facing the truth." Her eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for words. I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, her voice trembling. But I wasn't interested in her excuses, her attempts to weasel her way out of this. "Save it, Lisa," I said, cutting her off. "I know everything. The late nights, the networking events, the endless calls and texts. I've seen the phone records. I've seen the messages. I know exactly who you are, and I'm done pretending otherwise." She took a step back, shaking her head as if to deny the reality in front of her. But there was no escaping it now. I had her backed into a corner, and there was nowhere left for her to run. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Why did you do it, Lisa? After everything we've been through, after all we've built together, why throw it all away for some fling?" Her eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the dresser. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It just happened." "That's not an answer," I replied, my voice cold and unyielding. "You don't just accidentally betray the person you're supposed to love. You made a choice, Lisa. A choice to lie, to sneak around, to betray me at every turn. So spare me the excuses." She looked down, silent, her face twisted with shame. For a moment, I almost felt a twinge of pity, a flicker of the love I'd once felt. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by the cold, unyielding resolve that had carried me through these past weeks. I handed her the papers, watching as she stared at them, her face pale and drawn. "You'll find everything in there," I said, my voice steady. "I've made sure you get what's fair, but don't expect any more than that. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Freedom. Independence. Well, now you have it." She looked up at me, her eyes red and filled with a desperation I had never seen before. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't do this. I can fix it. I'll end it with Alex. I'll do anything, just, don't leave me. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of lies, the betrayals hidden behind her practiced smile, and I knew there was no going back. It's too late, Lisa, I said, my voice calm and final. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with it. She looked at me, her face crumpling as the weight of her actions settled on her. For the first time, I saw the true extent of her regret, the realization that she had gambled everything and lost. But it didn't matter. Nothing she could say, nothing she could do, would change the fact that our marriage was over. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, alone. I left the house that morning without looking back, my heart pounding as I stepped into the fresh air, feeling the finality of it all settle into my bones. There was a strange relief in knowing that I'd broken free, that I no longer had to live with the constant uncertainty, the nagging doubts that had become my constant companions over the last few months. My decision was made, and there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur of logistics and silence. Lisa stayed in the house, barely speaking, her presence a hollow echo of the woman I had once loved. Each time I caught sight of her, a pang of old emotions, memories, regrets, would surface, but I pushed them down, reminding myself of the lies, the betrayal. I slept in the guest room, a silent wall of finality between us, each night's silence underscoring the end of what we had shared. A week passed before I got the call from my lawyer. The paperwork was moving forward, he informed me, and Lisa would be served with the official notice of the divorce proceedings within the next few days. When I hung up, a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction washed over me. Part of me wanted to be there when she received the papers, to see her face when she realized just how real it all was. But the other part, the part that still felt a small sting of what I thought was love, knew it was best to stay away. That Friday, after work, I packed up a few things, knowing I couldn't stay in the house another night. I was ready to move on, to put distance between myself and the memories that clung to every corner, every familiar object in the house we had once built together. Just as I was about to leave, Lisa appeared in the hallway, her face drawn and pale. Are you going somewhere?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, not meeting her gaze. "I'm moving out for now. It's best if we have some space while this gets sorted." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Please, don't go. Let's try to talk this through. I know I messed up, but we can work this out. I'll do anything to make it right." I clenched my jaw, steadying myself against the urge to soften, to let her words sink in. "Lisa, I gave you everything, my trust, my loyalty, my whole life. You threw that away. This isn't something we can talk through. I can't live with someone who's betrayed me like this. It's over." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw a spark of real sorrow in her eyes. She looked down, biting her lip, her hands trembling as she struggled to keep her composure. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, unable to contain the question that had haunted me since the moment I discovered her affair. Was he worth destroying everything we had? She looked up, her face awash with tears, and for a second, I thought she might tell me the truth. But instead, she shook her head, her voice choked. I don't know. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The familiar excuse, the same hollow justification. I closed my eyes, exhaling a long, slow breath, feeling the last of my anger ebb away, leaving only a cold, resolute emptiness. "Goodbye, Lisa," I said, turning and walking out the door before she could say another word. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses, her pleas. I needed to leave before the last threads of my patience snapped entirely. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest space with plain walls and basic furnishings. It was a far cry from the home I'd shared with Lisa, but it was mine, a place where I could start over, rebuild from the ground up. The first few days were quiet, almost too quiet, and I found myself lying awake at night, the silence pressing in like a weight, my mind replaying old memories on an endless loop. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, meeting up with old friends I'd lost touch with, diving into projects I'd put off for too long. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the memories still crept in, lurking in the corners of my mind. I thought about the nights Lisa and I had spent laughing in the kitchen, the long drives we'd taken just to get lost together, the promises we had made to each other. And each time those memories surfaced, a sharp, hollow ache settled in my chest, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I could never get back. One evening, about 2 weeks after I'd left, I received a message from Lisa. I hesitated before opening it, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and curiosity. The message was brief, her words laced with regret. "I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry." I stared at the words, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Sorry. The word felt empty, meaningless, a feeble attempt to plaster over the cracks in our shattered relationship. I didn't respond, deleting the message and setting my phone down with a sigh. There was no going back now, no mending the pieces of the life we'd broken. But despite everything, a strange sense of relief began to settle in. The more time I spent away from her, the more I realized how much I had given up over the years, sacrificing pieces of myself to keep our marriage intact. I had compromised, let things slide, told myself that her happiness was more important than my own. And now, with the weight of that burden lifted, I could see clearly for the first time in years. I was free to live my life on my own terms, to find happiness without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. One evening, I met up with an old friend, Tom, who I hadn't seen in years. We sat in a quiet bar, nursing beers and catching up, and before long, the conversation turned to Lisa. "I heard about what happened," he said carefully, studying me over the rim of his glass. "I'm sorry, man. I can't imagine how hard this must be." I nodded, staring down at my drink. "It was rough, yeah. But I think I'm ready to move on. I don't want to waste any more time on someone who doesn't value what we had." Tom nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Good for you, man. Life's too short to let someone else's mistakes define you. You'll get through this. And who knows? Maybe this is a chance to start fresh, find someone who deserves you." His words stuck with me long after I left the bar, echoing in my mind as I walked back to my apartment. A chance to start fresh. For the first time, the thought didn't fill me with dread but with a faint spark of hope, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps, in the end, this was a chance to rebuild, to create a life untainted by lies and deceit. That weekend, as I sorted through the last of my belongings, a strange sense of closure washed over me. I had cut ties with Lisa, moved out of the house that had once held our dreams, and now, standing in my small apartment, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were still days when the ache of betrayal clawed at my heart, but I knew I was on the path to healing. As the sun set outside my window, casting a warm glow over the room, I took a deep breath, feeling the quiet peace that had eluded me for so long. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I would ever fully heal from the wounds Lisa had left. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. In the weeks that followed, I began settling into a routine. The days flowed by quietly, one blending into the next, and for the first time, I found a certain comfort in the silence. I'd finally moved past the initial shock, the gut-wrenching bitterness. My mind, once haunted by memories of Lisa and the betrayal she left behind, now felt clearer, more focused. I was learning to live without her, to fill the empty spaces with new experiences, new moments, a life truly my own. But one day, while I was on my lunch break, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I glanced at the screen, curious, but my stomach clenched as soon as I saw the message. Meet me at 7 p.m. in the old park. I'll be waiting. There was no name, no context, but I didn't need either to know who it was. Despite everything, I felt a pull to go, a need to understand what she could possibly want to say now, after all that had happened. As the sun set, I drove to the park, my mind racing with possibilities. Part of me considered turning back, driving away and leaving the past in my rearview mirror. But something urged me forward, a quiet curiosity mixed with the need for finality. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, sitting on an old bench near the fountain, her silhouette barely visible in the fading light. I approached her slowly, stopping a few feet away. She looked up, her eyes red and tired, and for a moment, I barely recognized her. She seemed smaller, vulnerable, stripped of the defiance she'd clung to the last time I'd seen her. "You came," she said softly, her voice a mix of surprise and relief. "I did," I replied, crossing my arms and bracing myself for whatever excuse she was about to give. She took a deep breath, glancing down at her hands before looking back up at me. "I needed to see you. To explain, everything." "You already explained enough," I said coldly. "I think we're done with this." "No, you don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. It wasn't what you thought." I felt a surge of irritation. "Lisa, you cheated. Lied. Threw away everything we had. What else is there to explain?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks as she reached into her bag, pulling out an envelope. She held it out to me, her hands trembling, her eyes pleading. "Please. Just, read it," she whispered, her voice breaking. I hesitated, torn between the urge to walk away and the curiosity clawing at me. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, I took the envelope, opening it slowly. Inside was a letter, the words scrawled in Lisa's familiar handwriting, but as I began to read, my confusion grew. "Dear Mark," it began, "if you're reading this, I've already left. I know it sounds cowardly, but I couldn't bring myself to tell you in person. The truth is, I did what I did to protect you. Please believe that." I looked up at Lisa, my eyes narrowing. What is this supposed to mean? "Just keep reading," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. I took a steadying breath and continued. "There's something I never told you, something I tried to hide because I didn't want you to worry. Last year, I found a lump. The doctors ran tests, more tests than I can count, and eventually, they confirmed it. Stage 4. I have months, maybe less, and there's nothing they can do." My hands trembled, the words blurring as I tried to make sense of what I was reading. I looked back up at Lisa, my mind spinning, but she nodded, her face pale and drawn. "It's true, Mark. I have cancer," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "And when I found out, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bear the thought of you watching me waste away, of our life turning into hospital visits and medication schedules. So I pushed you away. I needed you to hate me, to move on, so that you wouldn't have to go through this with me." My heart hammered in my chest, a mixture of shock, anger, and a strange, hollow ache filling me. "You did all of this to protect me?" She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I thought if you believed I'd betrayed you, it would make it easier for you to move on. I thought I was sparing you the pain." I clenched the letter, my mind reeling as I tried to process what she was saying. The months of confusion, the endless questions, the anger that had burned inside me, all of it shifted, twisted into something else entirely. I felt a strange mixture of pity and rage, the urge to hold her and push her away in the same breath. "Lisa, you could have told me," I said, my voice breaking. "You could have let me be there for you." She shook her head, her face twisted with guilt. "I couldn't. I didn't want you to be burdened with that. I wanted you to find someone who could give you a life, a real life, not one spent caring for someone who's already gone." We stood in silence, the weight of her confession settling between us. I looked down at the letter, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears I hadn't expected. The anger that had fueled me for so long ebbed away, leaving only the raw ache of loss, a sense of finality I couldn't have prepared for. "What now?" I whispered, barely able to meet her gaze. She looked at me, her face etched with sorrow. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mark. I just wanted you to know the truth. I couldn't. I couldn't let you go on hating me without knowing why." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint smell of autumn leaves, the chill of the approaching night. I stood there, the weight of her words pressing down on me, the future we'd planned slipping through my fingers like sand. I didn't know what to say, what to feel, how to make sense of the tangled mess of emotions swirling inside me. Finally, I looked at her, feeling the last remnants of my anger slip away, replaced by a quiet acceptance, a hollow understanding. "I don't hate you, Lisa. I wish you'd let me help. I would have been there, no matter what. You didn't have to go through this alone." She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I know. I wanted to protect you, even if it meant breaking both our hearts." Without another word, she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me in a fragile embrace. I held her, the silence stretching between us, the unspoken forgiveness, the weight of everything we had lost settling into the space between us. As we stood there, I felt the past fall away, the anger, the betrayal, the pain dissolving into something softer, something bittersweet. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned, not the clean break I had once imagined. But it was an ending, nonetheless, and as we pulled away, I knew that this was goodbye. She gave me a faint smile, her eyes filled with a sadness that cut deeper than any words. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered, her voice soft and broken. "For letting me go." I watched her walk away, the shadows swallowing her form, and felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. She had left, but this time, it wasn't with anger or betrayal. This time, it was with understanding, with a quiet forgiveness that healed a part of me I hadn't realized was broken. And as I turned to leave, I knew that, somehow, I would carry this with me, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what it meant to love, even in the face of heartbreak, and what it meant to let go, even when it hurt more than words could say.